I think we can start now, as people still come in. Well, thank you so much for joining us at this fireside chat. First things first, unfortunately, Colleen from Say Beauty is not able to join us today, but I'm very happy to announce that Cary Lin, the founder and CEO of Common Heir, jumped in short notice to talk about her brand and the research they've done with us. In case you're not familiar with Common Heir, they are a clean beauty brand, and they believe that skincare should not only be clean, but also kind to the environment. Cary will talk about her brand, later. But just to introduce myself as well, I'm Susanne. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Citruslabs. Cary only has 30 minutes, so I want to keep this intro also short. This is where I want to get right into it. A little housekeeping. Should you have any questions for Cary or for myself, please put them in either the Q&A part of the Zoom app. If you can't find it, you can also use the chat function, and we will answer your questions in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the event. And before we go into the fireside chat, let me briefly introduce Citruslabs, and then Cary introduces you to Common Heir, and then we go into the chat and into the Q&A. And I'll quickly tell you about Citruslabs. So we are the fastest growing provider for clinical trials for brands. And our mission is to provide brands with affordable clinical studies to create research-backed product claims that drive business growth. We've been around for about 7.5 years now, and brands like Common Heir, Naked Poppy, Trophy Skin, or Say Beauty are working with us. And apart from skincare and cosmetics, we also run studies for supplements, for medical devices, CBD, pet wellness, superfood brands. And as you might know, clinical research is really exploding right now, especially on the brand side. In 2016, there's actually some research that some companies did. Is there were only 100 studies registered on clinicaltrials.gov that have been sponsored by brands, and in 2021 it were almost 8,000, and that doesn't include perception studies. So it's a lot of research going on right now. And there are various reasons why brands conduct studies. For some, this is part of their brand identity. Others are looking to be taken more seriously by the medical community. And I think all of them are hoping to drive business growth with clinical trials. And we surveyed our clients about the impact their studies had on their business, and almost all of them saw an increase in website conversions and ad conversions. They had an easier time to talk to wholesalers, and also were able to create better marketing content and so on. Now, let me quickly show you some results of how study results can look like. As today's topic is clean skincare, I'm using only skincare examples. And if you're interested in supplements or superfoods or devices, you can leave a comment in the Q&A or chat, and I'm happy to send you something over. So let's start with Say. They did the Hydro Beam. This is the Hydro Beam overview. You can see claims around that here. Agreed, Hydro Beam brightened, illuminated, skin around the eyes felt hydrated, blurred the imperfections. Then we have here Embody. They were using also before and after photos. Then next is Naked Poppy. Their claims are really front and center on their product page. Similar stuff. The skin around eyes feels hydrated, looks smoother, more fresh, rested. Then we have Common Heir. 96% recommended to a friend. Their skin felt firmer, more nourished, improved their dark spots, skin clarity, and wrinkles. And also Common Heir, kind of amplified everything also with before and after photos. And this is it from my side. Now, Cary, please introduce yourself and Common Heir.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. I'm Cary Lin, the co-founder and CEO of Common Heir. We are a clean luxury skincare brand that launched in April of 2021. So we're pretty new to the game and have been working with Susanne and Citruslabs since inception, basically. We have two products in our lineup as of right now. We have a retinol serum and a vitamin C serum. So obviously two very high-powered skincare actives where for us, meeting our brand promise of, product performance without plastic-free packaging, involved essentially using clinicals as a reason to believe for a lot of the performance part of it. And most recently with retinol, we're really pleased to have Citruslabs as partners because personally very meaningful in terms of getting inclusive product development and testing into our process. So my background is in beauty, personal care, and consumer goods. And in my experience, clinical trials by default, not only do they cost a lot more than a small brand can afford, and I think even now it's a huge investment for us. A lot of the times you just find out that you have no control over the enrollment. A lot of studies on wrinkles and aging tend to lean towards lighter skin tones, Fitzpatrick's types 2 and 3 in particular, with my skin tone being, on the darker end. And so we just felt that for something like a retinol, the market that we wanted to address was underserved. And there was not a lot of studies on the impact of retinol on melanated and darker skin types and tones and sensitive skin. So Susanne and her team were great partners. Shout out to Jody, who's also on this call, worked very, very hard over the Christmas holidays to enroll folks that would have broad stratification within the Fitzpatrick scale for us to really bring that to life. And I know that was incredibly difficult for them to do, especially having people come in over the holidays during COVID to take. So again, real shout out to Citruslabs for enabling us to get the kind of results that were really meaningful to our brand purpose. And of course, the product performance turned out great. And we were more confident than ever in sort of our approach to positioning that retinol product. So I'll pause there. I'm not sure, Suzanne, if the audience is primarily brand owners or product developers, but happy also to answer any questions around that on my end.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we have a good mix here between brand owners and product developers. And Cary, you mentioned, obviously, I know that you've worked with us since inception. So even before you launched your first product, the vitamin C serum, you ran a clinical study with us and then launched the product with the results from the study. Why did you decide to do this?
I think part of it for me comes from just the intent behind the brand. I think within clean beauty, there are a lack of, and especially since our first product was a vitamin C serum at a very high concentration, it's about 10% in our serum formulation. We just really wanted to be able to stand behind our performance without plastic packaging promise. It's very hard to stand behind performance if you're unable to deliver a claim against that. And so for us, we wanted to come out of the gate swinging with not only a really strong sort of sustainability story, but the performance to back it up. And so in my experience, again, in prior companies, clinicals have run, upwards of high 5s to even 6 figures for similar studies. Time we maybe had only like 200K in the bank. And so for us, this was basically what we used as our marketing budget. We needed, both, my co-founder and I, strongly felt that we needed substantiation to show before and afters, since vitamin C is something that works on your skin over time. It's not like a gel cleanser where you put it on. Oh, did it take off my makeup or not? Did it leave impurities behind? Is my skin feeling stripped? Like, serums do its job over time. So we wanted to be able to allow folks to understand that, in order to use it over 28 days, what you were going to get in terms of results. And also for us understand when in those 4 weeks, a lot of those benefits would start coming in. So I believe we did a check-in in sort of the midweek to just kind of see how things were progressing, and then seeing how things like immediately sort of immediate perception, midpoint, and then final. And those are all things that for us really allowed us to understand how folks were going to feel about the results, how long it would take, and allow us to kind of, again, launch into the market with a big moment where clinicals now, as Susanne was saying, that was my first time seeing that bar chart. It almost feels like it's not an optional or a nice to have now. It almost feels mandatory because of, everyone else doing it and setting a bar for it. And so for us at the time, we just thought we had to have it. So that was for us a huge investment that I think has paid off.
That's great. And that brings me to my next question, because we often get the question, is a clinical study actually worth the investment? And it seems that for you, it is. You ran 2 studies, and I think it's part of your brand identity. But what would you say to anybody that's on the fence?
I think it really matters for the type of product and your product brand positioning. I think for us, we were in the luxury sort of premium space. Our product is $88 for 60 capsules, which is about 2 months use with daily use. And that's a little bit pricey. So I do feel like you need to show the value of something like that. Or if you are a brand that is like an esthetician brand, a derm backed sort of brand, I think with the rise of TikTok, coincidentally, over the last several years, just the trust that a lot of these TikTok derms have in educating our audience to be more, strategic with, how they look at and evaluate products to try. They are looking for clinicals, they're looking for results. And so I think if you're category, whether it's like a performance that is promising or delivering a results, like I said, I think if we had launched with a gel cleanser, we probably wouldn't have done it, but because that's our space, that's part of our brand promise. And like, that's sort of where the skincare industry is going. Like performance is like paramount, even more so than sustainability. I think like for us, it was a no-brainer, but for those on the fence, I think it's worth the investment if it's critical to the product format, if it's critical to your brand, or if it's, increasingly becoming table stakes in your sort of like competitive set to have clinicals. I think it can be hard to not have them. And yeah, if you have a high enough price, more value. So I think clinicals are a pretty no-brainer way to show visually values.
That's awesome. And, at the beginning, when you introduced also your study, you mentioned, that you already knew that, part of your brand as well is to be inclusive. So your goal for the study was really to have a really great representation of everybody, right? Even like darker skin tones as well. And you basically knew, exactly what you wanted out of the study. You knew what claims you want to make. You knew inclusion criteria, you knew exclusion criteria, also part because, you worked on clinical studies before. And can you explain how you decided on each of these aspects of the study beforehand?
Yeah, I think for us, we knew the audience for our product. And so I think that helped shape the enrollment criteria. And in terms of like the questions that we wanted to ask, like retinol, which was our second sort of product in which we really, really pushed for representation, or like a more cleanly stratified sample of darker skin tones, into the participant population. I think for us, that was like very, very important. It was part of our product formulation, sort of, I guess, internal brief between me and my co-founder from the beginning. And so that criteria felt very obvious. I think in the past, we've run retinol studies, and what retinol does is really, it is measurable. It, accelerates like cellular turnover. It helps like with wrinkles and fine lines. And if you're saying something like wrinkles and fine lines, it is very important to be able to show that, or to show that improvement over time or within, a population, just because it is a specific thing that people are searching for. And so for us within, I guess, the broader anti-aging space, it became very obvious the kind of things that we needed to be looking for. And as a result, we would need to be recruiting to fit sort of the audience that we had designed the product for, which was for folks with, more sensitive skin, particularly on the darker skin tones, Fitzpatrick's, types 4, 5, and 6. It is very hard to enroll, 5 and 6 for clinical trials. In my experience, they often don't get included. So, I think for us, the study design and criteria were very intentional, both because of the star ingredient that we were highlighting, as well as the overall positioning.
That is great. And so many brands that we talk to, when they think of studies, they think also of perception studies. In your study, the retinol one also included expert skin grading. So, also, I think for creating claims, perception studies are fine, but you decided to invest even more in it, right? And go like the extra mile. Why did you decide to go this path? Because I think we already have one questions also to tell us the difference between consumer perception and clinical trial. But let's first go into why, you decided to do a clinical trial.
Yeah, I think for us, having the expert skin grading was an interesting thing to look at. Again, I wouldn't recommend necessarily needing to invest at that level for every product. But for us, because it is a retinol, things happen in the skin that sometimes folks don't see. So I think consumer perception studies are great, because at the end of the day, the consumer experiences a product, whether or not they repurchase, like based on perception. So even if you tell them, hey, your skin moisturization level increased by like 50%, if they're not feeling that, it almost doesn't matter. So I think the two really do complement each other. And I think perception is like actually very valuable, because that's what is going to drive repurchase, right? How they feel about something versus like, if you tell them, well, it felt dry, and you're like, well, it shouldn't. It's like, it's not something that you want to have that kind of conversation with. So having said that about like the value of consumer perception, for us, we also know that sometimes like skin quality is not something that somebody can see on their own. So we just wanted to have sort of a third party sort of expert skin grader in there for us to know that the product was like really efficacious. So that's why we invested in it. And like I said, I don't think it would be necessary for everything, but because of the claims that we were looking at, because we were looking at fine lines and wrinkles, because we know that consumers sometimes have a hard time assessing that for themselves, it was important for us to have that in there. But yeah, not a knock on perception studies at all. They're very important.
Yeah, and just to explain skin grading, expert skin grading. So it's actually a dermatologist that is basically assessing the skin before using the product and then after using the product. And Cary, I think in your case, we even had 3 rounds of skin grading. It was a baseline, it was a midpoint, and it was then an end-line check-in.
Yeah. So I think for us, again, retinol sort of works its magic over time. So that's why we wanted to make sure we were going to be able to see that at every sort of time point.
Yeah, and just to also answer this question very quick about perception versus clinical trial. So typically clinical studies, really the goal is to create more robust, truly scientific research-backed claims. Typically what we see in our client base more sophisticated skincare brands like Common Heir, or even also supplement brands are opting for a clinical study, because in a clinical study you then can add the skin grading or blood markers or digital biomarkers. This is what you can't really add for perception studies, but again, they are a great tool to actually get does that actually make a difference in is that sample size. Then we have another question. Do you have a control group not use the product? So I think, Cary, in your case, that was not the case. Yours was a single group study, right?
Yeah, I think part of that honestly was due to resourcing for control group. And that is honestly very much the reason why we didn't do that. Also because vitamin C and retinol have a demonstrable sort of like clinical literature behind them. So if it was a completely novel ingredient, I think obviously the argument is there, but because it has been well reviewed within medical literature that all do have clinical or randomly assigned, a control group in there, we felt very comfortable that it would definitely be above baseline. So, and we did not claim a specific like treatment effect above, a placebo. We just claimed like, this is what our compared to the participants baseline, which again is how people perceive it. They perceive their own change over time versus their change versus someone else's. And so again, it kind of aligned, our understanding of how consumers make purchasing decisions with the fact that we were a little bit tight on resourcing, with the fact that like both of them have a lot of RCT, claims behind them, just as two ingredients that are like gold standard in dermatology literature.
Yeah. And just the abbreviation RCT is randomized control.
Sorry.
Don't worry. It's randomized control, which is basically the gold standard of a study. And that includes typically a placebo and a control group. But again, from our client base, we typically see these for supplements, not so much in skincare. And most of the supplements that use an RCT, actually the ones that want to be taken more seriously by the medical community and also publish their results in peer-reviewed journals. And then we have one question that is around the retinol, Cary. Is retinol classified as a clean ingredient?
I think for us, we consider retinol the gold standard in anti-aging. And so the way that we selected our retinol in the form of it, we used a retinol derivative actually. So we avoided the ones that were encased or encapsulated with BHT and other sort of like things that have made historically retinol unclean. But I think, again, that is clean is not a real thing. So for us, we felt very strongly that we could pick a retinol formulation that would meet our standards. But obviously any retinol product is not going to be verified by the environmental working group, no matter where it's derived from or how it is. That's just kind of a decision that EWG has made. But for us, I think you have to have a retinol. Like there's nothing like it and what it does for the skin. So I hope that answers that question. I'll also say, I know we might be a little bit short on time, just to answer your question earlier on like, should I invest in like clinical studies, et cetera, et cetera. I think for us, that continues to be a big question because it is a large portion of our R&D. It'll probably take us, some time to kind of break back the initial sort of cost on it. Not only do you kind of get an R&D tax benefit on that for those of you that, have an accountant who can help you claim an R&D tax credit. But another thing that I think about it is it's just a fixed cost. And over the whole life of the product that you're selling it, you get to kind of amortize it. And so it's just a thing that occurs one time. And then over the rest of the life, those clinicals are good as gold. If your product lasts, you're selling it in market for 10 years, for 5 years, then it becomes almost negligible for, the upfront cost. So again, it's just something to balance. It is something that you can do later when your company is more mature, to have product to go through clinicals with your product, or if you end up changing formulation.
That's great. Cary, I want to be respectful of your time if you need to jump off.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Cary. Jody and I will stay on for further questions. I think one question around cost just came in. Cary, thank you so much. This was very insightful. Before you jump off, where can people find you? Where can people contact you? How can they access the Common Heir website?
Yeah, so we are available online, Common Heir, spelled HEIR.com. And we're also at Credo Beauty and Anthropology. So,
and you are EWG certified, right?
yes, our vitamin C is EWG verified, and both of our hero products are award winning. So we're really excited that we recently got the Glamour magazine seal for our brand, as well as our retinol just got best retinol from Birdie's Best of Beauty. So I'm sure some of the performance that we got from Citruslabs contributed to us sort of standing out in the pack. So
that is amazing. Well,
yes, we're really excited. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And for everybody else, Jody and I will be here to answer more questions.
Thank you so much for having me. And I hope this was helpful to anyone that had any questions about the process. And DM me through Instagram or whatever if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Cary.
All right, bye. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, so I think there was a question around pricing. So typically pricing is, it depends on the study you want to run. It depends on if you want, for example, in Cary's case, skin markers involved, like expert skin grading. It depends on if you're a supplement brand, if you want biomarkers. It depends if it's a single group study, randomized control study, or even just a perception study. Perception studies are so great. So on average, our perception studies will run between 8 to 10K. Our clinical studies start at 25, and our randomized control studies start at 45. And it doesn't mean that you're paying this. It just means that this is basically starting cost, and our cost includes everything from start to finish. It even includes shipping. It includes participant compensation. There are typically no surprise cost except when the study scope changes, and Jody can absolutely tell you that study scope unfortunately changes sometimes. Okay, so we went through the cost. Is there anything else that you're interested in?
Susanne, can you talk a little bit about the process and steps in general, start to finish, that are part of a clinical trial or consumer perception study?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically our studies have, include 3 different steps. The first step typically is study startup. Study startup includes everything to essentially begin with your study. It includes the design of the study, what Cary and I talked about earlier, right? Setting inclusion exclusion criteria, setting a study procedure, all of this stuff goes into study design. Also setting if it's a single group study, a randomized control study, maybe even a crossover study. Then we also create all study material like consent forms, questionnaires. We'll set you up for your skin markers or your blood markers, or integrate with Apple Watch, Whoop bands, Oura rings to actually collect robust data. And then for clinical studies, as a next step is getting everything to the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, which is an ethics committee that is checking if the study is robust and if it's ethical. Then when everything looks great and gets approved, second part basically is trial execution. Here we work, participant recruitment, retention, compliance. This is when Jody typically takes over with her team. Here, we make sure to recruit participants in a specific time frame. We are making sure that they don't drop out, that they are following the protocol and take your product. And then third is all about data collection. Here we have a central platform in which we consolidate all study data that was collected in the study. As I mentioned, we can collect data through questionnaires. They can be validated by academic institutions. These questionnaires are typically used by medical professionals, physicians all over the world to diagnose certain conditions or to measure progress on certain conditions. We can also create study-specific questionnaires, and then, biomarkers, digital markers, skin markers, whatever you need. And then at the end, you will get a clinical study report. And that report also includes claims, and it also includes statistical analysis for clinical studies and qualitative analysis for perception studies.
Thank you. Susanne, earlier you talked about having skin grading, and Cary had skin grading, a dermatologist, throughout her study. Can folks still create legitimate claims if they don't have a dermatologist review before and after photos?
Yeah, so that would basically be, qualitative improvements. So there's basically difference. What Cary also talked about, quantitative improvements versus qualitative improvements. Now, quantitative improvements are great. As Cary mentioned, your skin hydration went up by 50%. That's awesome. But if the consumer, your end user doesn't see, this improvement, then they are very likely not to rebuy your product. So, obviously quantitative improvements from skin grading, for example, are important, but qualitative are just as important as quantitative. And you can still make claims for from a consumer perception study. It's just that there was no instrumentation involved, but you can still make claims because you still have data to support that. And frankly, most skincare companies opt for perception studies.
And can we do imaging such as Vizia or Antera?
Yes, we can do imaging as well.
Awesome. Another question, as an indie brand, 10K is still a big investment. Would you consider grouping a study? So for example, grouping a serum study with different brand hair products so that there's a savings in the recruitment costs.
It's funny that you asked that, because this is what we do also on a regular basis. So typically, especially when we have smaller brands and we're testing products that don't interfere with each other, then we can absolutely do that. So for example, we had currently running studies with actually 2 companies that are grouping to actually save costs. So for example, we have I think we have a cleanser, an under eye serum, and a lip balm. That is one group. And then we have another group with a moisturizer for the face, hands, body. That's another group. Now it's very important that your products don't interfere, because otherwise results might be, you kind of have to bundle it then and say, well, for example, when you're using a serum and a moisturizer, then you have to make claims based on the bundle, because you can't really tell, was it the serum, was it the moisturizer, or was it a synergistic effect? But we have done studies, for example, for supplements in the past, where participants were first using one supplement, and then they wanted to find out if they would use the other supplement on top of it, if there's a synergistic effect. So this is something that is also an option.
Is there a difference in price between consumer perception studies versus core clinical studies?
Yeah, there's a big difference. I think especially for smaller brands. So this is basically what some of our what like the average price is. On average, depending on very different inclusion, exclusion criteria, add-ons that you can, basically purchase additionally, including participant compensation, including shipping. Our perception studies run between 8 to 10K, and our clinical studies, they start at 25K.
Susanne, how do you make sure that participants actually do what they're supposed to do during the study?
That's also a great question. So most of the time, it is trust, because you can never tell if somebody is not taking it. But this is also how, they would probably do this in the wild. obviously sometimes you forget, sometimes it might not be convenient to apply a product, take a product. We do have like a hard stop at between 75 to 90% compliance that has to happen. Otherwise, we would deem them a dropout. But Jody and her team actually make a really good job on communicating with participants that they should take the product. Jody also makes a great job with recruiting. So for example, our recruitment process is not, we want to fill that as fast as possible. Obviously, we want to do that, but we also want to make sure that we give you high quality, steady participants. So, part, recruitment, part then compliance that we do. And then, if you want to be super clear about it, we can actually include questionnaires, daily questionnaires, weekly questionnaires, asking them how much product did you take, or even pill counting, product counting. Yeah.
For sunscreen products, what claims, if any, can you make? And could we run a study on eliminating basal cells? Has anyone ever done that with a topical?
So sunscreen is, depends if you want to check for SPF, depends if you want to do sunscreen that is also nourishing the skin. For example, Say Beauty is doing that with us. They claim they are more interested in actual, is that the sunscreen nourishing? Is that helping, with like standard skin concerns typically, versus does that actually help to protect from the sun? So it always depends what you're looking for, but most of the studies we can run, yeah.
Any more questions for Susanne? Susanne, can you talk about some of the risks or issues when running these studies? And what is the best way to avoid these risks?
So I think, Jody, I think this is a question for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd love to answer this. So one of the overarching goal here is to make sure that as many study participants have the best chance to complete a study successfully. So some of the risks are when we see a study that has really complicated or complex instructions, or there's just simply too much to do, and we don't want to make the study cumbersome for folks. We want to have clear expectations, and we want to have some reasonable instructions for folks. Another risk is when packaging isn't branded. Folks really like to receive something through the mail that's branded and beautiful. And we also want to set clear expectations about when folks can see a benefit to the product. So for example, with wrinkles, we're not going to see anything the next day as we would necessarily with a moisturizer.
Okay.
Did you want to add anything there?
No, I think that was great.
Okay. The participant that asked about the sunscreen products would like to know specifically if we can run a study about, and with looking at results as far as eliminating basal cells.
Yeah, I would need to look into that. I can't answer that on the spot.
That is, I think that's a wrap.
I think
No, another one. Sorry, Susanne. A couple more just came in. What is the biomarker for nourish?
Do you mean nourishment of the skin? That's probably, so for nourishment of the skin, if that is, so that would be a skin marker. So nourishment of the skin can be, in the case of Cary, for example, skin feels more nourished, feels more, is more bright, for example, more illuminated, more hydrated. So that can be done through expert skin grading, but then there are also, measurements, what you can do to actually measure hydration. for example, skin elasticity, so we would need a little bit more information on that to actually give you a real answer. But you can do almost anything, any concern that you're looking for, you can check with expert skin grading.
Another great question. Typically, how long are studies?
Again, that depends heavily. So we have studies that are literally just a day because they are checking for like something, an immediate effect. Then we have studies for 2 weeks, 4 weeks. I think, Jody, the longest we've done is like, is it 8 months, 9 months? Yeah. So it depends. It depends on a couple of factors. Mostly it depends on when does your product typically, achieve peak efficacy, and what are the concerns that your study participants are having, and how long does it take for your product to then reach efficacy so that your participants, your core group, see a relief.
What about a study for UTI elimination? We have a product which wipes it out and keeps them from coming back. Could we run a study on UTI elimination?
Yeah, I think one of our first studies was on UTI. So yeah, we've done that in the past, and yeah, it's less about UTI elimination, because then you would be in the realm of this is a drug versus this is a supplement. Then you would need to go through FDA, FDA approval basically. But what you can do instead of saying elimination, for example, is that you're reducing the occurrence. For example, you have study participants that have regular UTIs, and then typically in that time frame you would see like 2 to 3 UTIs, but instead of 2 to 3 UTIs, they actually had none. And then you can use some data and some nice graphs around that.
Thank you. I think that's a wrap.
That's it. Great. Well, then, thank you so much for participating. That was great. I hope, it was informative. And, you can check us out at citruslabs.com, or, you can also send us, similar to Cary at Common Heir, you can DM us on Instagram. You can email us at hello@citruslabs.com, or use my personal email at Susanne, SUSANNE, @citruslabs.com. And thank you so much for participating. And this was recorded, and I will send out a recording of this afterward as well. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.